wrong colour. It's part of your painting, for heaven's sakes. You've got painting up the backing red signature. Many coats of this. Look along it. And just use my fingers for some of these, I think. Textural areas that come down here. Whether I can get the glue on its own to do it. Let's just see. It's quite nice trickly stuff, it might. With that, just a little bit more strength of colour into some of these areas. Same tone exactly, which is rather strange, but hardly ever do you get water that is the same tone as what it is. It's dry enough now to start to work on again, and we're going to want to start to work some textural effects before I take off the masking fluid. Bring my picture back to work from. I want first of all to work up some of these darks on top of the ripples. That's what we can do with that. A little bit of rose into my... We'll just see if we can drag across. I want it fairly wet for this. Not fairly. I could use a single brush, but I'm going to just use at the moment a rake just to get some of these nice ripples that are going back into this opaque feeling of the lovely rich effects that you get with watercolour that people forget. They think watercolour has got to be so delicate and so fine that now is the worrying part. Will the masking fluid come off? Oops, as he kicks the camera again. So it makes a bit of a mess of it, but eventually it will come up as alright, I hope. Brush skills are important, how you hold your brush. Too much, so taking back a bit. I'd say we're about there for that painting. I don't need to do too much more. It's a nice enigmatic piece. As I continue into two paintings I've already started doing the foundations to. As you see here, I'm doing a woodland one with the trees towering up above us, pine trees in a wood in Vienna. And then I'm going to go on to one of the Scottish ones, light at daytime more than that very early morning, misty morning. So there's a bit more vibrance. Let's go quite different into that. Who's got so much skill and expertise, which is different to mine. So what we're going to do now is coat this piece of work in the resin we've been talking about, this twin mix resin. And I know nothing about it, so as he's teaching me right through this, I'm going to film this as a record not only for myself to watch and get it right in the future. We're going to actually coat this piece now.
Almost looking across it so you can see the shine, and that way you'll pick out any areas that you missed. So any areas that you miss, that's what the spare resin, the little bit that's spraying is for. Pretty straightforward, apart from any of the gloves.
You haven't used gloves until now?
Yeah, you don't touch the resin at all during any of the processes, because if you do, you actually transfer moisture to it. So
you can see how beautiful the texture is on that. Okay, well thank you very much, Peter. That's certainly been of great use to me. So it's a revelation for life, this one, for the rest of my work. And I'm sure that many of the other artists looking at this film will enjoy what you've done. And now you can see the gorgeous, rich texturing and colours that we get now that resin has been put on. Well, I'm going to do a short article now about textures, and I've already written all of this up for you and given you some addresses and links to some of my films as well, and lots of ideas for you to use for texture, both when buying stuff from the shops or from the S.A.A. or whatever, and if you want to save yourself a bit of money and be more exploratory and a bit broader in the amount of textures you can do, ways of using PVA glue, polyfiller, and various seeds, wools and everything here. I'm going to show you if we can use them making these textures with. Right, let's take a look at what I've got here. And there's all sorts of things, from a fork, where you've mixed up your plaster in a bowl. You can add it with a palette knife, with painting knives, with brushes, with your fingers. I use my hands a lot for these textural works, and forks and so on for making grasses and textures. And we've got all of these articles and objects as well. Polystyrene, which you can just break up into little tiny balls, look like this, or chunks for rocks. We've got pasta of various types, all of the split peas, beans, even feathers from pheasants and things you can find to add to your paintings if you want to your pictures, and give more texture. You can cut mount cards, you can cut paper to overlay them. A lot of films on my site which will show you all of this being done. This is just the basics. It's an exciting time you can have. Here I've got pipe cleaners, I've got wigs, I've got bits of fur, bits of fluff, bits of toweling, fluffy toys I can chop up, wool, this is very, very useful, the wool. It's an ordinary fine polyfiller, but you can use coarser polyfiller, you can use sand, you can use gravel, anything you like, and then mix it with the PVA glue. And the PVA glue will dry like plastic, clear. You will have seen pictures that I've done using tissue paper as well, and with the glue, when the tissue paper dries, it goes transparent, so you can make beautiful stained glass window effects with it, although the colours aren't fast in tissue paper. Very lovely effects, but great for making petals of flowers and overlaying butterfly wings and so on. So again, you'll see some examples. Also, decorating outfits here for cakes, for the icing. We can mix this plaster up, you can mix the filler up with PVA glue, and we can squirt it through various different nozzles to get different effects of textures as well. We can use sponges, we can use all sorts of things, just go mad with it. You can see all of these different rices and pulses that we've got here, and pasta and buttons and all sorts. All of these can be mixed with the PVA glue. I tend to pour glue into a bowl, and then I can drag the wool through that. I can put the tissue paper into that, a little bit of water if you want to make it a bit thinner. And then when it's all dry, we can paint that with a deep blue emulsion or black emulsion, and I work from my deepest colours up towards my lightest. I noticed when I looked at an exhibition by Monet, an exhibition of Monet's work in the Tate years ago, that he was doing something a bit similar. He didn't seem to always paint great layers of paint on. Sometimes he appeared to use a fill-up and build up and then give that a coat of yellow ochre, and then work his colours over the top, which gives a wonderful impressionist effect. If you're working from darks towards light, it means that the highlights on the surfaces of the textures are actually going to be your last colours and your highlights on the painting. So you can work from the darkest to your lightest. When you come to those last little bits of texturing, then you're going to have your highlights. So you can mix polyfiller or filler with a little bit of PVA glue to make it more plastic, make it stick so it doesn't crack and break off the canvas or the board. You're probably better with MDF board because the board is stiffer and doesn't bend as much, whereas canvas is a little lighter and more delicate. The MDF is a more modern material. It only needs to be thin MDF, but as heavy as you think before it starts to bend. And so then you've got after that the world is your oyster, because you can use as many methods and materials as you want. You'll see me using spaghetti, for instance, for doing reeds and grasses, using all these pebbles and polystyrene and things for doing rocks, using the wool for doing seaweed over the rocks in Scottish locks. Lots of ideas we can do. Almost anything out there that is textural you can do by adding this to it. So you can build up a painting. It's a bit like when they varnish these prints, and you've seen them varnishing a heavy thickening pastel varnish in the direction of the brushstrokes to make it look like real paint, but in fact it's just a flat surface. We can build up that surface ahead of time with knives, with brushes and so on. You can even brush this filler on and make it look like heavy paint, and then we can put colour over the top, so it looks like a 3 or 4 inch thick painting, but isn't. It's just built up with the filler and the colours over the top. We get much more texture that way, and it's a lot cheaper on materials as well, of course. I've built up great big abstracts, as you'll see on these sheets, where I've been bending card and getting all the card into shape, or even laying paper mache over it, using this with newspaper to build up across forms and shapes, even wire, and then
using the plaster and so on across that to get fine textures and to finish off. All sorts of fun you can have. You don't have to be, you no longer just have to use acrylics as they come in the pot. We can mix acrylics with the PVA glue as well, and you've got all these various acrylic mediums that you can use for pouring and so on. But I actually have used this acrylic with the acrylic paints to make a pouring paint as well. If you're doing cells and so on, it's quite useful. There's all sorts of. They say the world is your oyster. Don't be kept back by tradition now. If it works, do it. It's fine, and it is great fun, as you will see from the films. And I hope you'll explore and have a good go at it yourself. These films of mine are just to give you ideas, and to give you some more incentive to stimulate you to find great things to do and fun to have with art. So this is just one other way of working. So finally here we have various wools, plastic bands, pipe cleaners, furry toys and fur and fluff that we can use in the textures, polystyrene, peas, rice, pasta of various sorts, even these great big ones here, more split beans and peas, and right down to just mixed bird food with all the various grains and so on in there, and feathers. So you can cut card, you can cut paper, you can mould the tissue paper around forms. You know, it's a fantastic way to work. Just keep a whole bin full of odds and ends. Most of it can come from your kitchen cupboards and foods anyway. And as I say, don't forget these little articles here where you can actually squeeze the paste you make through to get more texture still.